Welcome, developers. So here we are, and there were some event things that we needed to clean up here. I've given it the gaming influence subtitle because, well, you will see that it appears that there is some stuff in there that wasn't really important, while Flight Simulator was still a simple flight simulator. But now that we're on Xbox and even PlayStation, it starts to become more important to add that kind of thing. So let's begin. And it's all about flow events. Now, flow events are about the flow of what is happening within the simulator. So it appears to be some kind of extension of what is happening with system events. But what they actually appear to be about is, well, loading FLT files, so flight files, flight start and end. So you see here a very strong support for the idea of doing a flight, either one that you saved yourself or a pre-built one with something like a challenge or training or something like that. And then, of course, recovering from crashes, but also back to menu. Then there is this thing about teleportation and back on track, which is, of course, something especially if you're following a flight plan, and skipping. And then there are even some flow events that appear to be targeting real-time cinematics and replays. And we'll see what that's about a little bit later on. Now, on the SimConnect API side, there's very little documentation about this. There is a little bit more on the JavaScript API, and there is a lot more on the WASM API. So I got some very nice images from there that I'm going to share with you. And this is the kind of things that flow events actually try to capture the flow of. To start at the top, when you have a crash, then you need to recover from that and go back to the track or what you were doing. So it first tells you that we're now going to start this procedure. Then, of course, it does mean, since you've crashed, that you need to be moved to a different place. It tells you when that is done. Then, of course, it needs to load the correct flight file that is associated with that. And there might be a stabilization phase where you need to go through all these phases again until everything is working as it should. And then you're done. Similar things with mission events, forced back on track, and of course, again, the aircraft crash. And it looks mostly the same. There is some reordering. I'm not totally clear on when which scenario is being used for an aircraft crash, but it's all there in the documentation, and it is to help add-on developers get into the groove again. Let's put it that way. If you have a very complex simulation of the aircraft or of something else, and you're teleporting or recovering from a crash, that means that you need to get that simulation back on normal behavior, and that might take a while and take a bit of things to do. So that is why I said this is kind of the gaming influence, because this is about what in the gaming world you would call save points and respawns. Even if it's not a save point you've made as the user yourself, it's a save point that was identified in the mission or in whatever thing you're doing, and going back to that point and restarting and retrying. And then, of course, we also have those world photographer and real-time cinematics. And during startup, we all see that because you get this camera shift focusing on a deer near to your aircraft. And that's the kind of thing. You can build a mission to go out, fly to some kind of nice point of interesting point, and then make a picture of that. And then there could be additional rules there determining the score, where you actually are scored for doing it from a certain direction, including certain landmarks and so on. So that's what this all is about, because it's going to do havoc with your aircraft if it's a very complex aircraft. And anyway, it's going to ruin the simulation at that moment, and you need to get back on track. So why this API? Well, teleportation, respawning, as I said, can have a big impact. So aircraft system simulations need to reset. Speed, flight surfaces, gear position may need adjusting. Autopilot route calculations need to be redone, and so on and so on. And if you're stopping to take a picture, maybe you need to pause the aircraft or something, or maybe the aircraft is paused, and pausing will also affect it, because you cannot let the aircraft keep consuming fuel and having interesting effects with hydraulics and electronics if actually it is paused. Then if this is something which is mostly done in WASM or JavaScript, and we have that API, why is it also in SimConnect? And that is because the SimConnect API is available in WASM and is used, not just because it is there and it might be better for some things, but also because there are some add-ons that have migrated from being pure SimConnect add-ons to WASM add-ons. And then even if you don't do scenarios, taking teleportation into account helps you to prevent mishaps. Starting a flight gets more detailed tracking, and you can recognize replays. You get a warning when the user broke off a flight to go to the main menu, which might be useful as well. This does mean we now have flow events. And those flow events are an all or nothing thing. You subscribe them or unsubscribe them simply by saying you want them or you no longer want them. But you cannot enable them for specific types of flow events or for specific scenarios. So the API is pretty simple: subscribe to flow event and unsubscribe to flow event. And if you are subscribed, you get a SimConnect receive flow event message with two fields. One of them is the flow event, which is that specific block within the flow, and a flight path, which is for the two messages that concern loading flight files. All the other times, as far as I've been able to see, the path field is empty, so it has length 0. So this is pretty simple, and let's go and have a look how that looks in C and C++. Okay, so here we are in Visual Studio, and as you can see, we have the usual main function. There is a guard in here because flow events are pretty new and definitely only here for 2024. And as I said, it's pretty simple. We connect and then we subscribe to flow events, and we handle messages until stopped, and then unsubscribe from flow events and disconnect. So that's pretty simple. Then we go to handle messages, and handle messages is just the usual. There's not much happening here. Handling for exceptions, for open and for quit. And here we have the flow event. So we go up to handle flow event, and handle flow event just simply looks into the message, and then it prints out a small message about the kind of event we're getting. And that's, of course, if there is a path, then it will output the path as well. So it's a pretty simple application, and let's see what it does. And then, of course, we need to switch to the flight simulator. And as you can see, I have it here started. So let's take a very simple one. We're going into career mode, and just take a very small initial one. Let's go here into the private pilot license with that one, and then just here learn to use the elevator. And here in the box you can see that we already have real-time communication starting and real-time communication ended. That was because we were in a dialogue. Then we have here the briefing, and we can say start training. And you see that now the flight file is loading, and the flight file has loaded. And teleport starting, teleport complete, because we are somewhere in the air, and flight is now starting. And of course, we potentially have more communication going on. And now we need to do things. And I mean, that's about it. Let's stop this. And we go back. No, sorry. With that, I mean we go back to the main menu. And you see flight ended and returning to main menu. So this is just a very small demo, but it shows the principle. Don't need to do much, just to show that we're getting these. And yeah, we don't have a program here that actually needs to do things with these, but we could. Okay, so because it's just a very simple demo and it's mostly going to do the same as the one in C, I've immediately gone to the C++ version, and let's take a look at that. Main, no real surprises here. We go to run test. Run test sets up the connection, opens the connection to the simulator, and then creates a flow event object with the handler. And then on the flow events, we do a subscribe. Now, this subscribe works a little bit different. What it does, it passes a set of functions for the ones that you want to be handling. So, of course, if you would like to, you can also subscribe and get all of them and look at the number parameter to find out which of the events has happened. But in this case, you can specify specific functions for each of the different ones. So, for example, you could do just flight load and flight loaded and leave out all the others. They will default to no function and simply be ignored if they come in. And another difference is because we now have specific functions for the specific events, only flight load and flight loaded will need a string view parameter, which gives you a string view on the flight file, and the other ones just have no parameters. Okay, and it will work just the same as the other program. We can start it here and then switch to the simulator and go through the same routine. And you see it already gets the first one. Then we go here, go down, start this one, start training. And you see I'm getting all those events just like the last time. And here we go. So this was just to show you that the events are coming in like before. And we'll go back to the main menu, and you see that the one is received as well as flight ended. Okay, that's for the demos. Okay, so back from the demos, and let's continue. There are some other event-related calls that we haven't dealt with yet. The first one is set system event state, which is a very interesting one because, for example, say you have subscribed to the events for every frame generated or frame displayed, and you say, well, I need to pause that for a moment, then of course you can do an unsubscribe. But the simpler way is to use this one because individual system events can be turned on or off. And then there is set system state. It is still in the header file without any indication. And then try to find it in the SDK documentation and you will not find it. And that's because it's been deprecated. So we're not going to do anything with that. Now, that effectively brings us already to the wrap-up for this episode. Flow events seem to be more detailed system events, but they are mostly aimed at missions and races. And as such, they are more prominent in the WASM and JavaScript environments, and that's probably where you'll see them more, even though they are exposed in SimConnect, because SimConnect is also available to WASM add-ons. Now, the question is, what do we have left? And I was keeping track of everything that I have and have not yet covered within the API, but we're pretty much nearing a wrap-up, it would seem. General flight plan and flight loading and flight saving, there are calls for that. We haven't done anything with that. Yeah, they're pretty simple. I can make an episode about those kind of simple leftover bits. Clear data definition. For some reason, we skipped that when we did data definitions. Request notification group hasn't been handled. Input events and controllers. There is quite a lot. Again, I think this is an effect of having more console focus, but you could still do interesting things with that. And I think we can do some nice things there. Then we have facility data definition filters. We did facility data definitions, but you can use filters on those. Yeah, we just skipped those. Can do them in that wrap-up one. Jetways, I've already said, there's very little documentation about that. It's very much aimed at tooling that wants to do ground services. And there's very little documentation, so for me that's very difficult to find out how it works. Cameras, and this was a surprise because I was just checking the header file and we have some new arrivals. Very recently, in recent SDK updates, we have a communications API, and that one looks very interesting because it gives you some very good alternatives to client data, because this one is also exposed in WASM and JavaScript. So it is meant for having different parts of your add-on on different, say, platforms, whether it's using SimConnect or the WASM API or the JavaScript API, and let them communicate with each other. So that's a nice one, and definitely I think that will be the next one I'm going to spend time on. And the camera API, because there was just one call for cameras, and now we've got a whole load of them. And again, I think that has to do with being able to put the camera somewhere outside of your aircraft and taking a look at you or taking a look at the environment. So it's probably to go with a mission where you're going onto a photographical tour. Let's see what we can do there. So next time we're going to go for the communications API. As usual, I do this for the subs and likes. So if you want to leave with one of those, then I thank you in advance, and we'll see you next time.